Okay, so it's June 8th, 2025. I finally got the opportunity to get out and travel somewhere out of state by myself for a fishing trip. I had a plan. Take a trip to southern Arkansas to show you guys unique strains of smallmouth bass that exist down there. Except, well, yeah. The river flash flooded the day before I was supposed to leave, so there was no way that I could fish down there. Even worse was the fact that nearly every river within a 400-mile radius was all completely flooded out and unfishable. I didn't want to not go on some kind of trip at all. Like, I wanted to go somewhere. I put in all this effort and all this time to go down to do this trip, and now I can't do it because everything is flooded out. So I scoured the map and I looked for the nearest place to me that had not flooded fishable water, and that ended up being the Drifless region of Wisconsin. This is the story of an accidental fishing trip. Turns out completely changing where you're going less than a day before you're supposed to leave is actually more difficult than you would think. No, but really, it's not as simple as just changing your GPS to somewhere else. The Drifless region streams are mostly home to trout, specifically brown trout and brook trout. So that means you're using different flies, rods, and methods for catching them. Nonetheless, I tied some last-minute trout flies the night before we were supposed to leave, and Sunday morning we headed out. You guys may remember the season 2 finale, which I uploaded 2 years ago. That was also in the Drifless region, specifically within Wisconsin. This is a part of the reason I decided to come here last minute. Last time we went to the Drifless region of Wisconsin, I was completely new to the area, and that combined with some of the most difficult conditions you can have in the summertime for trout fishing meant that our last and first trip here was kind of slow. Not bad, I mean, I still think it was fun and worth it, but I know the Drifless region can produce some amazing trout fishing, and this time I wanted to do better. So, after 10 long hours of driving, we got to camp, which was literally the exact same campsite and spot that we camped at last time we came here 2 years ago. Except last time, I didn't have my blowhaw with me, which also, I learned how to pronounce that correctly, I think. It's blowhaw, right? The stuffed shark, it's blowhaw. But never mind. Considering my blowhaw my good luck charm, so I might bring it with me on all my fishing trips now. I don't know, we'll see. Because it was already kind of late, I decided I was just gonna fish the next day and not when I first got there. I brought a steak to make for dinner.
Mark, look, I made a steak. A steak?! Yes.
And then I also cooked some homemade bread the night before, so I brought that with us too. So I was gonna make a steak dinner. I saw in an Instagram reel, there was this guy who was camping and he cooked a steak by like wrapping it in tin foil and then throwing it in the campfire to cook it through, and then he took it out and pan seared it. And I wanted to try that, so I went ahead and tried that. Honestly, it was pretty good. Russer also got some steak too, because he's a good boy. After dinner, I kind of got bored. I was the only person camping at this campsite this week, which means I can pretty much run around and be an idiot. So I saw a cool tank, and then I died. I think Russer put something in my steak, because So after dying, I headed for bed. We were really like embracing the nostalgic camping vibes. I even brought my DS, which had Lego Star Wars on it, and we played that in the tent. So that was great. That was pretty much all that happened day one. I woke up kind of early day 2 because we had fish to catch. I made some eggs and coffee and toasted some of that homemade bread, and it was very, very good. After this, we headed into town, which is Viroqua. By the way, I love this little town. I love the Ozarks. Like, I really like where I live. But if I could move anywhere else in the country, I would definitely move to Viroqua. But I got my temporary fishing license, and then I stopped into the fly shop to get some flies and also to get some fly recommendations from the people in there. In case you guys haven't seen the season 2 finale, let me briefly give you a rundown of the natural history of the Drifless region and also its fish. The Drifless region is a geographic region found within Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, which is called the Drifless because of the absence of glacial drifts during the last ice age in this area. I wrote that in my script. That was a mouthful. The area is primarily made up of relatively small hills and valleys, with lots of small limestone springs that feed the many little creeks that can be found in almost every valley. The area has 3 trout species that you can find in its rivers and creeks, those being brown trout, rainbow trout, and brook trout. The brown trout are the most common of these fish, and they're also an invasive species. They tend to be completely wild here, which means they could reproduce on their own in these creeks, and they aren't stocked by humans. Rainbow trout are also found in the Drifless, and they are also invasive, although they are far less common, and they're only stocked in a handful of a few rivers and streams. Brook trout are really the only native trout species that you can find in the Drifless. They're actually a char species, which is a separate genus that is still within the salmonid family, but it's technically different from that of like brown trout or rainbow trout or other trout species. The Drifless region is actually one of the westernmost areas you can find native brook trout within the United States, which I think is pretty cool. Brook trout are definitely the main draw for me wanting to go up to the Drifless. So you can imagine not having brook trout down where I'm at, and also them being a native species in the Drifless. That made me very excited to go catch them again, and naturally that kind of dictated the first spot we ended up going to, because I wanted to catch a brook trout far more than I wanted to catch a brown trout. So yeah, the first creek that we ended up hitting, it only had brook trout. Which, by the way, disclaimer, I'm not going to be mentioning any of the creek names in this video, with the exception of maybe the Kickapoo River, because that's kind of the main river that most of these creeks feed into, and it's fairly well known, so I don't mind saying the name of that. But for the protection of all of these places I'm fishing, so they don't get like bombarded with tons of fishermen possibly, I will not be saying the names of any of the creeks in this video. So the first creek that we went to was actually the last creek that we fished in the season 2 finale video. It was that little brook trout stream that we fished at the end of the video. But like the weather was great. It was like cloudy. It was actually a little bit chilly for it being June. There was a little bit of wind, but like all of that was great. Like great fishing conditions. So yeah, I slipped into my waders and we headed out there. So right here in this pool in front of us, there is a bunch of brookies that are rising in here. It's kind of crazy, a little tiny pool like this of the creek. Russer. Russer's in the way. It's kind of crazy, a little tiny pool of the creek like this can hold like 50, 100 fish. The guide at the fly shop recommended this particular fly to use. It's a size 18 dry fly. I believe it's called a clink hammer, but take what I say with a grain of salt because I completely forgot what it's called. I made my way down to this one kind of plunge pool where there was a ton of brook trout in there, and I threw that fly in on my 4-weight rod, and I mean within the first 3 minutes we had our first brook trout on the line. This is a very pretty brookie. Look at the blue halos and the yellow spots. Just a really pretty fish. I mean, the colors and patterns on these fish are so unique, even compared to other trout. I didn't want to eat any of these fish, so I released them. This brookie is absolutely gorgeous. Look at this fish. That is a beautiful brook trout right there. Look at that. Very pretty brook trout. After catching a dozen or so brook trout, we decided to go to another creek to try for wild brown trout. I would have stayed longer at the first creek we went to, but the public easement isn't very big, which meant we could realistically only fish a few pools before the creek flowed into private property. The next creek we went to was another creek that we fished last time we came to the Drifless. It's a creek that mostly has wild brown trout, and it flows through open pasture, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. I mean, the pasture having mowed down grass is nice because it means you have plenty of good backcasting room to make nice, big, long casts. But it's also kind of a negative thing because it makes the trout extra spooky, and these ones definitely were. I threw on a purple hippie stomper, which is a terrestrial fly that's pretty popular to use in the Drifless. It mostly imitates like grasshoppers, or I guess it can imitate beetles, or anything that's a terrestrial insect you might find in the grass or on the trees or whatever. It kind of imitates that. I made my way down and I was just hitting every single pool, just desperately trying not to spook away any trout because they were so incredibly spooky. But I made my way up to this one pool where it was like really big and flat, and there was like a very slight riffle going through it, and I like crouched down on my knees and made this very delicate cast as far as I could upstream with my hippie stomper. And I actually caught a trout from doing that. It was like a 13-inch brown trout. After I caught that trout, it started to rain and it was close to noon, so I decided to take a break and go get some lunch. Now, you cannot go to Wisconsin and not get Culver's at least once. And before you guys ask, I did not get cheese curds. I probably should have. Yeah, Culver's, it's not my favorite fast food restaurant, but I mean, it's not bad either. Like, I enjoy it. You know, like it was a good burger. It was a good bacon burger. I give it 7 out of 10. So after lunch, I really wanted to go try blue lining. For context as to what that is, blue lining is essentially picking a random blue line on the map and fishing it. Places like the Drifless are excellent places to blue line because nearly every little creek in the area has some trout in it, and a large portion of these creeks have public fishing easements on them. There's thousands of these little creeks in the Drifless. I don't think you could ever fish every single creek in your lifetime. So I looked at the map and I picked out a creek that wasn't too far away from our campsite, and it did have a public easement on it. I mean, there's so many good trout streams here, I didn't even really care where I went. It just had to be somewhere I hadn't fished before. And when I got to the stream, I mean, it was really pretty. It was a bit more forested than the creeks we had previously fished up to that point, and it had these really pretty rock bluffs on like certain sides of the creek. It kind of reminded me of the Ozarks in a way, like back home, just, you know, slightly different, but it was really pretty. But I was still throwing the exact same purple hippie stomper I'd been throwing on all day up to that point. I made my way upstream, and we got to this one little bend where there was a riffle kind of dumping into it. I hooked into a pretty little wild brown trout. Catching a fish while blue lining is really rewarding, honestly. It's one thing to catch a fish in a stream you already know is good, but to catch a fish in a place that you've never been before and you pretty much just guessed that it might have good fishing in it, it just makes it that much more rewarding. But after I caught that little brown, we just continued to make our way upstream, and I just started catching small trout after small trout, which I don't mind catching small trout. I'm not a size queen. I even hooked like a surprise brook trout around all of the browns in one of the holes, which was pretty cool. We waded upstream to this one spot where there was like this really pretty large bluff that was kind of overhanging a pool. And in this pool, I hooked so many fish.
Oh man, look at that. Look at that. That is a beautiful brown trout. All right, we'll go ahead and let this guy go free. Oh, thanks for letting me catch you, buddy. I'll see you later. Goodness gracious, these wild browns are so feisty. They just want to go. Oh, well, it's all right. It'll wash out.
So already this trip was going very well. I mean, I had caught more trout in this one stream than I did in the entire 4 days I was here last time. But I didn't want to get my hopes up too high. Fishing is a game of variables. Sometimes conditions are perfect and sometimes they aren't. You can do all you can to increase your chances of having a good fishing trip, but if Mother Nature wants you to struggle, you are going to struggle. Either way, I was very grateful to fish that little stream, and I was pretty optimistic for whatever would come the next day. So I woke up the next morning to the beautiful sound of birds chirping and to the feeling of having a dog butt on my face. Yeah, Ruster decided he was gonna plant his butt like right by my face when I woke up in the morning, so that's great. But yeah, for breakfast I pretty much made the same thing I did the previous day, just eggs, and I toasted some of my homemade bread that I brought with me. But yeah, after that we wasted no time in heading out to go fish another creek. So the next creek we went to, I have technically been there before. Last time we went to the Drifless, we did fish this creek, we just didn't fish this particular spot on this creek. Because we were farther down, I decided to go way upstream to the headwaters. And yeah, this stream ended up being like the only bad fishing spot on this trip. I mean, for one thing, it was a ton of bushwhacking. Like, as soon as I got off the trail, I had to bushwhack through tons and tons of high weeds, and like the river bottom itself was full of this really nasty like dirt and mud and silt, which would sink your legs down like above your knees. Like, it was a huge pain to walk through. And there was no fish. I didn't see any fish there. I didn't get any bites, nothing. There was no fish there that I could see. Yeah, so me being the idiot that I was, I decided to wear shorts that day, and there was a ton of wild parsnip growing around this creek. So I ended up getting like really, really bad blisters, which I didn't even discover on me until after I got home from this trip. But yeah, when we were done bushwhacking this spot, I had caught 0 fish, and my legs were like red and purple. They were very much in pain. So after that spot ended up being a bust, I decided to go somewhere that I was a bit more familiar with. So I went to one of the creeks that we had fished multiple times last time that we were here. Yeah, this creek was another creek that was mostly full of wild brown trout. And I kept throwing hippie stompers because they were working. We decided to go upstream from this highway bridge that I'd pulled off next to. And I mean, it only took maybe 3 or 4 minutes after I was there until I caught my first brown trout there. Yeah, this creek was considerably better than the last spot we fished. But we just worked our way upstream and I just kept catching more and more fish. Like, I lost count of how many fish I caught at this particular creek. But we got up to this one pool. And this pool isn't any different than any other pool on this creek. It looks like a pretty average little river bend, right? But for whatever reason, this pool had like much bigger brown trout in it. But I made a first cast with the hippie stomper way up at the corner of the riffle, and immediately, I think maybe it was like a 19-inch brown trout, 19 or 20-inch brown trout. Went to take it, but I missed the hook set. I was like, oh my god, you gotta be kidding me. But I went and I made a second cast, and on the second cast, another fish came up to take it, and that one I actually did hook, and that one ended up being like a really nice 14, 15-inch brown trout.
Thanks for letting me catch you, buddy. Oh, bless her. I'll see you later.
Which isn't quite as big. Like, that's not the biggest brown trout I've ever caught by any means, but this would end up being the biggest fish that we hooked on this trip. Kind of a side note, something that's kind of interesting about the brown trout and the driftless, or at least I think it's interesting anyway. There's actually 2 different genetic strains of brown trout that are found within the driftless region. Those 2 strains being one strain which originally came from Scotland and another strain which originally came from Germany. The German brown trout strain is typically the most common strain of brown trout that you'll find within the US. Some of the fish I caught, you could definitely tell they were German browns, but there was a lot of them that I caught where you could kind of tell they were a lot different, and I think these ones were the Scottish brown trout strain. It's just kind of interesting, I think, how you can almost kind of see the differences in strains depending on the 2 that were stocked there. Anyway, after catching more brown trout than I could count in the morning, we decided to go back to the campsite after that and have some lunch. Yeah, I made hot dogs over the campfire, and then we had like roasted marshmallows for dessert. You really can't go camping and not eat at least one stereotypical camping food, in my opinion. So while I was munching on wieners, my friend Chase messaged me and he asked if I could go check out a creek for him. For context, Chase is a friend of ours from Indiana who regularly fishes this area. He went with us the last time we fished in the Drifless, but he wanted to know if I could go fish this particular creek and see how it is. So he sent me a pin for a place that we could park next to this creek, and after cleaning up lunch, we headed out there. So this creek ended up having a near 50-50 split of both brook trout and brown trout. It was actually kind of interesting. Like, there was a few pools I fished that only had brook trout. Then you'd work your way upstream and the next pool would only have brown trout. Like, usually in driftless creeks, you typically have predominantly one fish species over the other, at least from what I've noticed in my own experience. Like, you'll go to a brown trout creek and you might occasionally catch a brook trout, but it's mostly brown trout. And then the same goes if you go to a brook trout creek and vice versa. So to catch like a near 50-50 even split of both in one particular creek is kind of interesting, I think. After that, we made our way back to the car, and the sun was just starting to go down, and me and Russer decided to aura farm. So yeah, I took like 20 pictures of me shrugging because I thought it would make a really good thumbnail for this video. Actually, you know what it really needs? It needs like 20 arrows pointing towards a guy. Maybe throw in Markiplier in there for good measure too. Yeah, that's gonna get people to click on it. Okay, if this video gets 1,000 likes, I'll make this the thumbnail for this video for a whole month. So on the final day, we had to leave, obviously, but I still wanted to do a little bit more fishing before we left. I decided to go back to the same creek that I had caught my first ever brook trout the last time we went to the Drifless. I don't know, I thought it might be kind of sentimental, but when I got there, there was already 4 other guys fishing it. Keep in mind, this creek is like 2 feet wide in most places, not exactly somewhere you can have a lot of people fishing it. Not wanting the other fishermen to stop me from catching a fish here, I walked down to this one spot where there was kind of a flat pool, and I saw a school of brook trout in there, so I decided to wade in there and throw in my hippie stomper and just see if maybe I can catch one of them. To my surprise, I actually did. Even if the creek was occupied, I mean, I can't complain because at least I did catch one. After fishing that spot though, we had enough time to fish one more spot before we left, so I went back to that same creek that I caught all those brown trout at the previous day. It was still fishing pretty good. I went to a different spot on that creek, so we weren't fishing the exact same portion of the creek that we were fishing yesterday, but it was still pretty good. I caught like 4 or 5 brown trout from this particular part of the creek. I would say that's a good note to end the trip on. I was gonna add in this part towards the end of the video about how you should appreciate when life throws you curveballs and how I learned a valuable lesson with this trip or whatever, but it kind of sounded pretentious. So instead, I'm gonna end off the video with this picture of a big striped bass I caught last week. Pretty impressive, right? Yeah, I'm totally not throwing this in here to show off or anything. I would never do that to you guys. Showing off my fish on a fishing YouTube channel? In this economy? At this hour? Localized entirely within your kitchen?
Localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
That's it?
No.
No, but in all seriousness, thank you guys for watching this video. I'm going to be rebranding the whole channel shortly after I upload this video. Femboy Fishing is going to be rebranded to Femgirl Fishing because I'm not a boy anymore. I'm a girl now. I'm trans. So this video is also me kind of coming out. So yippee! Yippee! Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye!